So this is the statement from Herman Kelly, the leader of the Irish Freedom Party. Quote, "The Irish Freedom Party is a political party in the business of running in elections to get elected, attaining political power, and culturally changing Ireland for the better." I find that it's interesting choice to place running in elections to get elected above all else or first, right? I don't know if there's any intention around that, right? But sometimes the things we say and the things we don't say can reveal our values and stuff, right? I'm not saying that is the case here, but I find it interesting. And this may suggest that Herman views this as the primary aim, as maybe he feels it has the best uh, potential for attaining political power and changing Ireland for the better in that order, right? So the devil lives in details, as we know, for there is a difference between, although there's certainly a tension between them, top-down cultural change, what you could call social engineering, if you will, and a grassroots shifting in the mindset amongst the general people, okay? To attempt to emphasize this difference by way of a choice, would you prefer to be unhindered in your expression of an action in life, or would you prefer a government, a priesthood, a monarchy, or whatever sort of rulership to decide what is best for you? Naturally, again, the devil is in the details. You rarely find people who are totally disposed to one extreme, to the neglect of another, right? So a manager also needs the people under him or her to be working to support the manager in a way that the manager then can support the people that work underneath them, right? There's a symbiotic relationship at play there with, in certain areas, one takes more primary decision making, and in others, there's a primacy in the other two, right? So staff will be responsible for certain things, manager will be responsible for other things. Same principle involved, if not the same dynamic and structure, right? But the same principle of an interplay between two disparate forces or two forces, aspects of a society, right? Working together, clashing together, resolving things together. We'll continue with the quote or the statement. Quote, "Two relatively new members of the party had been setting up a vigilante group, Shinadina he's referencing, since September with notions of forming a political wing." So what we're now moving into is wordplay, where categories are created and categories of emotionally loaded terms, right? So instead of offering and exploring what this vigilante group, quote unquote, is for and stands for, there's an attempt made just to distance oneself or to paint it in unimpressive fashion or in unappealing fashion by labeling it as a vigilante group. People think vigilante, they think chaos on the streets and lawlessness, right? So we're now entering into what has already hindered society as we stand, where categories and emotionally loaded words have been wielded as cultural nail bombs, right? Nearly self-detonating terms. Whereas if you're called one, the racist is the perfect word, right? So if someone's branded a racist, they're nearly socially or intellectually ostracized from being able to offer up their perspective to the culture, to society, to the collective psyche of a people, right? Because you've been labeled as this horrible word, therefore anything coming from you is tarnished. Fundamentally, the meaning in what people are trying to do is important rather than the name or the label that others might put on them. It is the meaning. What is it you're motivated by? What is your desired result? What are the aims you have? And what are the ends you're willing to use to attain those? That is what is important. That is what needs to be unpacked. And laying claim to a responsibility also burdens the person with the duty of influence and leadership. So to claim yourself as a leader, to stand in that role as a leader, you also must accept the responsibility of the influence that you have over people. The influence in your actions, the influence in how you present yourself, the influence that comes from the words you use, the influence that comes from the arguments you make, the influence that comes from how you're seen to be treating other people, the influence that comes from the delegation of power and authority in others, right? All of those things matter. So when you accept the role of leadership, you also carry the burden of the responsibility and the influence that comes from that position. For attempting to sway people based off of a connotation in a word or connotative meaning without actually explaining or unpacking the meaning symbolized by the word to those you wish to lead is a recipe for confusion and misdirected hostility. And granted, Herman might come out and unpack that in a video or unpack that in something else, as is his gift, right? And I would hope that he does do that, because sloppy interactions are not needed at the moment. And as much truth and honesty and honor as can be mustered by all involved is what is needed. The coming together is what is needed. Because uncorking animosity between people based off of emotionally loaded terms is something that is very hard to put a cap back onto, and perhaps harder still to remedy it after the fact. He goes on to say, quote, "One was also frequently on X Spaces with Justin Barrett, who identifies himself as a fan of Hitler." Now, what this is, as anyone with a bit of sense can see, is guilt by association. And what Herman is doing here, unfortunately, is holding others to a standard that he surely would not apply to himself, nor would he agree with others applying it to him. I'm sure he would claim the same thing of the nonsense of guilt by association, because he has pictures with Greta Thunberg, and by that claim then you could say that Herman Kelly is for the destruction of the oil industry, the petrol industry, the deindustrialization of the world for the sake of green agenda. I'm sure he wouldn't accept that for 1 second, but he's willing to use that against people here. And I suppose to give a biblical example, it would be, well, Jesus spoke with the devil in the desert. Therefore, Jesus is in support of, or is just as bad as the devil. Okay, that sort of a thing. And these sort of tactics are most often used by people who are trying to save face, to not lose, and who are operating out of their own personal or social ego. Okay, so they're trying not to look a certain way, or trying to look a different way to people. Attempting to take somebody's reputation instead of showing them to be incorrect or flawed in their thinking or their ideas is to not play fair, but also to play to the people instead of the truth, right? If I can colour people's perspectives of people and colour them bad, then I, by default, by showing people that these people are bad, become the good guy. Therefore, I get the approval of the people, instead of I am allied to the truth. And I know I'm speaking the truth, so you can come on side with it or not. It's nothing to do with me personally. Okay? And I think this is a big issue involved in this whole thing. However, to, I suppose, play to the people here is perfectly consistent with, quote, being in the business of running for elections and getting elected, as Herman started out his statement with. So in that regard, he's being consistent here. But what this is the tarnishing attack of a politician who wants to, quote, culturally change people and their thinking by hijacking their emotional response to somebody. And this is what you're seeing here. This is my take from this. This is what I'm seeing here. I would put it that way. This is what I am seeing here. This is what I'm taking for this. And you can take that for what it's worth to you, right? So, debt by association. Herman says that here. This was harming the image of the party and diluting our message because we aim to be... I'll go back. He was setting up opposition to the Irish Freedom Party, as well as bringing the party into disrepute due to debt by association, okay? So, debt by association, according to who? Is it the average person or those who would use this association to try and tarnish you? Either way, you're seeing a decision being made to put distance between people so that others cannot use something against you, in this case, Herman. You could see this as tactically astute, or you could see it as ceding some sort of moral ground. And the effect of this can be great, as it now offers up a standard of an Irish person that can and cannot be associated with. for the good of the party. And again, there's always a pragmatism involved in that, because in order to affect change on a political level, you need to be able to get into those positions. And in order to do that, you need to get the nominations or the votes, or you need to get the backing of people. Therefore, and this is the age-old argument, can you continue to be totally full of integrity to your principles and morals and pitch the truth at people and hope to get in on the back of that? Or do you try and dilute your own message? Do you pay special mind to who you're seen with, who you're talking with, how others view those people? And do you make decisions based on that, based on how you will be seen by other people rather than based on what you believe? But effectively what has been spoken of here is the elevation of the party, or the primacy of the party above certain types of Irish people that association with might lead to dirty looks from people. And the backhandedness in this is something that I would like to point out, because essentially we have a case here of, we won't include you, we will reject you, but please vote for us so that we can have the power to change the culture that you live in for your own good. I'm reminded here of Oisin, when speaking with St. Patrick, suggesting that he would forego heaven if it meant dwelling in a place that would have excluded his father and his own men. We will continue. This was harming the image of the party and diluting our message, because we aim to be sane and sensible, keeping away from the authoritarianism of the far left and the far right. So naturally, implied in this is that those being spoken of or spoken about are, by default, I suppose, or by counter to Herman and the Irish Freedom Party stated position, they're deemed to be insane and nonsensical. There are wedges being driven between the Irish people in this sort of talk. And again, ask yourself, what is the purpose of speaking about others in this fashion, of going about addressing whatever the issue is fundamentally behind the scenes, addressing it in this vitriolic, I would say overly emotional and overly ego-driven personal fashion? Is there any goodness to be taken about this? Is this the way forward? Does this have a practical value, depending on what your goals are for each individual? Is this the way forward towards the future that you wish to have in Ireland as an Irish person with Irish people? And again, what is the source of this? Like, where is this coming from? Are we leaning on principle here, or are we more devoted to the personal? Herman then goes on to say, quote, a significant clique that centred on these individuals got elected onto the Ard Comhairle over the summer. Right, so like this happened under Herman's watch, and it is now that he's speaking about it. So did he not put these, or vote to put these people forward? Is there any acceptance of his responsibility as party leader, or whatever the position he has in there is prominent, right? So is there no ownership there on himself, right? And these are important things to chew on for ourselves, because we can think of them all day long between ourselves, not just in this regard, right? So in our own. So what level of responsibility are we willing to accept? Are we willing to take all the glory that comes with correct decisions and things accomplished, and then deny our responsibility when things go wrong, or when those we have appointed or those we've backed turned out not to be what we think they could have been or would have been? What sort of responsibility do we accept there? How much responsibility should a leader, or someone that strives to be a leader, should they accept? And after some failings in-house, should they come out and throw people under the bus, or should they come out and take it on the chin as leader and accept that though this person was the leader in this position, therefore the buck stops with them, surely, right? And I certainly don't want to be walking down the road of which is right or wrong. they're both decisions and choices, and I would say even types of people. And based on the decisions, the thought patterns, the ideology, the values, all that sort of stuff that goes into a human being and goes into each of us, there will be different outcomes for different types. So the question is, which outcome can you see coming from different types, and which outcome do you think is the most appealing, is the most fruitful for your tiny time in this life, and for your family's tiny time in this life? And one final point then that Herman makes is speaking of other, quote, successful national parties in Europe. So the German one, the French one, Swedish Democrats, Reform Party and others have had to expel and distance themselves from silly or dangerous trends in order to gain votes. So that's the game here. That's the aim, at least from this man's perspective, right? And I would suggest to that have we not had enough of that? Of, well, look, the Europeans are doing it. You hear Helen McEntee say it all the time. We're the only now nation in the EU that aren't doing this, therefore we should do that too, right? Instead of recognising that in order for the Irish people to overcome the bog that we're in now, suffocating bog, being slowly strangled while also being slowly buried alive, that cutting off aspects of Irish society and other Irish people, is that the way forward? By denying, if we view ourselves as an Irish people, we cannot just decide to cut off people who hold different temperaments or different persuasions because we don't like them, or because we think other people won't like them. That is not the way forward. It might be the way forward politically, but socially, the price to pay for political success is that you're after driving wedges between an already disintegrated population, who are already to a large extent, are after putting themselves into different categories continuously. These categories are endless. And then I suppose the opposition to that worldview, which is what the Irish Freedom Party, I suppose, would suggest themselves to be, is to continue to drive wedges in between the Irish people. And so take that for what it's worth. I'm finished with the Herman Kelly thing now, and I will just say another couple of things regarding the greater context of why I wanted to use this statement. So again, my desire here is not to get into a he said or she said tit for tat, although the truth of things, it must be primary, right? So it is important, the validity of things. Instead, I'm hoping to highlight the issue which can come from such obvious outbursts from people in influential positions, as Herman Kelly certainly is. So by denying legitimacy to people who are not deemed sane enough or sensible enough, or who need to be shunned based off an apparent guilt by association, many Irish people are being told that this party has no place for you if you're of a certain persuasion. Okay, and those are the words of the party. Words are vague, and there are no ideas even shared in this message. It's vigilantes, cliques, all this sort of stuff. Insane, that kind of thing, or not sane. And Irish people do not need any additional fractures. Irish people are in desperate need of a community and bringing people together in the recognition of a shared past and an intertwined fate and future. Whether we like each other or not all the time, or whether we like all of us all of the time, or some of us some of the time, whatever the case is, we are bound together. We are bound together. We were born together, we are bound together, and we will perish together. And which way that goes is entirely up to how we begin to see each other again and see ourselves plugged into the context of the Irish people. And I suppose it's not something you can fake. I don't even think it's something you can learn. Or maybe it is intellectually. But seeing yourself as a part of the Irish people, one person makes up a part of the Irish people. What you do affects the Irish people. What the Irish people do affects you. There's an interrelationship there. And by denying aspects of that, you are resuscitating old ghosts that need to be reasoned with, dealt with, and integrated, instead of being revivified and animated again. Okay, the ghouls of the past, they can still devour us, right? These things are not long sleeping. For we all remember the quote, if there is an Irishman on the spit, you can be sure that there's another Irishman turning it. And so this is simply not the time for personalities to be coupled with principles through the medium of something as dishonest and dishonourable as name-calling and slippery words and guilt by association. What is right and correct, and what is Irish means all of us. Cutting off those parts of us that we do not like or wish to be recognised by is a jumping off point for insanity and suicide. The same goes for a people. We cannot do well if we only wish to have certain Irish people governing the rest. It will not work, it has not worked, and will lead to catastrophic fissures in the Irish mind, the very thing we all claim to be attempting to fight for and heal.